beans were one of them. And the dry beans were one of the crops that were that he did have experience with, and he said on those ones that he was more commonly saw a 2-inch between the seed, but that was also on the 22-inch spacings. So again, so if you do the 144 divided by 22, that means 6.5 inches gives you a square foot when you're looking at one individual row. So if you do the math there, that comes out, if 6.5 inches is a square foot, and you're seeing one every 2 inches, then they're right on about 3 per square foot. So I looked at Alberta Pulse again, and that is actually right in their range of 2 to 4. Now they're saying 2 to 4 plants per square foot. So even with some mortality, you're still within that range, and it depends on whatever particular variety you're growing. So I knew I was close, but so they did kept working a little bit more on the machine. So I did what most agronomists do. I posted it to Twitter to see if I got any responses. And then I also I thought to check with Jamie and Ken here at Farming Smarter, because this is where I had seen it, and I wanted to just check on their experiences with it. And so yeah, their seeding rates, they were able to get those seeding rates, but it was because they're running a plot machine, and you can go slow. And I think that was what we realized, is that the machine was working. It's just that trying to go the speeds that we wanted for planting speed, it was just too fast for it. The plates had to spin too fast. So that's where we tried 3/4 of the rate that I was looking for, and the machine did start to work. He was still driving, I think 3 miles per hour, so slower. So slower than what we were looking for, or lower than what we were looking for, and slower speed. And so he went in on that. Now that works up to about 7 seeds per square foot, and so that's with some mortality in there. You're still going to be lower. It's still kind of on that low end of the range. So now what happened, and this was actually a good learning from it, is that instead of trying to just keep working at it to perfect it, working at it to try to perfect it, we just started. It was getting to late afternoon, so we thought we should just go and just get at least something done and see how it worked. And the guy running the machine said that he found after a few hours he's able to keep bumping his speed up and get faster and faster. And I forget what speed. I forget what speed he was eventually able to go, but he said the machine started working a lot better over time. And then I also noticed, as I started digging up more seeds, that it was actually doing a better job. There was less misses and a lot more accurate. So I think the machine just needed to work itself. Well, just kind of, I guess the machine needed to kind of wear itself into place and get things kind of working. So okay, I see a couple questions here. Well, first of all, yeah, it is just the video for right now. I'm going to put up the PowerPoint pretty soon. And with the seed damage, no, I didn't see any seed damage. It seemed to do a very good job of placing the seed, and I didn't see any cracked coats or broken seed or anything when we were digging them up. So, and emergence wise, when it did come to emergence, it did, the overall average was around six plants, 6 to 7 plants per square foot. So I think we had very good, I think the seed did very well going through it. So, and what I was also going to say with the, just with the machine working it in, this was kind of backed up, or it kind of, it was backed up later on. So after peas, we did the seed canola, and then after the seed canola, the very last crop to do was quinoa, and that was a late addition to the crop plan. And if you've ever tried to seed quinoa, you'll realize it's even smaller than canola, and it's almost impossible to find in the field. But or when you've when you've planted, and even for a week or so, or a couple weeks, even just trying to find it coming up it's tough. But what we did find is that on seed canola, there's always those tram lines that, so a couple of units are always left unused to make the tram lines. And when we started trying to do the quinoa, those 2 units were the tough ones, that because they had the plates in them, but they were never used. So it did take just a little bit of wear on the machine, and a little bit of setting up that we had to do to get everything working right. So, and so in the end, and then also just tracking seed usage. If we were at that higher rate, we would have been using about 4 bushels per acre, and in the end, we used 3 bushels per acre. So it was right on for seeding. When I put it to 3/4 of the rate that I wanted it, it was pretty well right on that 3/4 of a rate. So I'm going to get the PowerPoint up now so you can see some pictures of it. Okay. Now with the PowerPoint up, I guess I can't see the chat, so maybe I'll check every once in a while if there's anything shows up. So here, okay, so this was planted on April 28th. So this is 3 weeks later. And of course, it was a very slow spring. And so this is so it took a long time for things to come up, but they did. And as you can see, it has done a very good job. Let me see if I can get. Oh, that didn't work. I was going to try to get the laser. I'd seen that laser pointer in here earlier, but I can't seem to find it. So anyways, you can see it there. It's got fairly good emergence. There's a few little gaps, but nice and looks very good. So this is a close-up of it. You've got nice even emergence coming up. And so this is this would be what, about little over probably 5 weeks after planting. So we're getting a nice even stand there, coming up very well. This is about a week later, so this is well, only 9 days ago. So you can see that it's making its way across. Now this is where, if it were the 7.5-inch rows or tighter rows, it'd be pushed together already at this point. But then this is a picture from just a few days ago, and you can see that it's filled in completely. It's a complete mat over top of there. So okay, I'm just gonna look. I seem to have lost the chat. Oh, there it is. Okay. Are there any other questions right now before I move on to the next part?
Hey, Scott, can you hear me?
Yep.
I think people can also probably chime in with voice questions if they like too, but I was a little nervous when you first started doing this, but after seeing the pictures, I'm kind of excited. So what are you thinking, and what is the grower thinking? Are they obviously must be pretty happy with how it looks?
Yeah, the grower's happy with it. They're like everything has come. I mean, everything's come along pretty well. In other field, I mean, even in the other fields, there's one field that is really, I didn't put it in the presentation or any of the pictures in it, but has like a very distinctive change from sandy to clay, and I think it might have been land leveled at one point. And there's a huge difference in the size of the plants, but it's still pretty consistent among the two different soil types. Yeah, for most of the fields, they all look similar to that. So, are there any other questions before I go on to? The next thing I'm going to discuss is kind of advantages, disadvantages, what I see on it. So, okay. So advantages. Okay, I'll share this PowerPoint again here. So advantages. This one here, the depth control, or the individual unit depth control, is really interesting. Anyways, so if you can see the mouse, you can see how what it is up in the top left. You can see there's a sign, or there was something in the grass there, so the planter operator had to veer out, and you can see that the side unit was up in kind of some fluffy land and through some residue, and then off the side of a hill and then down into a tire track. I think where someone, you can see two different tire tracks. Someone had driven a pickup truck along through here. And so you can see how it went in and out fine, and the next rows it kind of just followed the contour of wherever it went. So that's one of the really big advantages that I've seen, is that it seems to, it does a good job in getting that proper depth all the time. And when I would dig up plants later for checking emergence, like it was very consistently on the 2 inches, which is where we were looking for. So the interplant competition, that was it was interesting what Ken said about with the canola, and with more vigorous. It's hard to say because I don't have a comparison to it, but they definitely come up fast, and they seem to, like, they really fill in those rows and really get growing fast when we have them so close together. Now, and actually, I think an inch, like trying to have them an inch apart within the row, would be probably a little too tight. It might be getting a little too competitive. Now, my next thing that I was thinking of with this is that, I mean, having the rows a little closer would be nice, but there's machinery limitations and cost limitations. But the stitching together, like when they actually start moving together, we can see, oh, it went to my next slide. Like here within the row, they're holding, they're all, there's no gaps in the rows, which I think is going to be an advantage. Like the rows are all, you don't have little clumps or gaps in between. And so when the rows do start touching, and of course, like this is under irrigation, so we're going to have very tall plants here, 2 feet or 3 feet tall. So, so I think they should stitch together and hold together well. And in this season too, what's been nice is, because even up until a week ago, there was still a lot of room in between the canopy for airflow. So I don't think the disease pressure is, like, I haven't really seen any disease, so it's helping to keep the canopy dry. And so this was one of the disadvantages, and this is one thing that's on the responses on Twitter, and also just my own thoughts are the weed control is going to be a concern, because they were sprayed with Viper at the forget what it was, right in the middle of the node. I think it was around the fourth or fifth node. So they were sprayed right about the optimal time, but with the wider rows and a slower growing season, they just didn't, there was more weeds came up. And so this is where this will be a concern. I mean, they're covered over, and I don't think they're going to be much of an issue now that they've got everything covered over, but they are still growing underneath the surface there. So so this is where I see one thing that we could do, and I had encouraged the grower to get a cultivator, but it didn't happen, is having the option, probably at this stage, I think you might want to be a little earlier than this, so those tendrils don't get wound up or it doesn't get pulled in. And even to get some of these weeds before they get too big is, a chance at using a little bit of inter-row cultivation. And I think with inter-row cultivation, there's some, I mean, this is a full tillage system here. On no-till, I know that you're trying to minimize the soil disturbance as much as possible, but your seeding, I think, disturbs, if you have a good cultivator set up, or if you're doing it in a setting it shallow, I don't think you should be disturbing it as much as, well, maybe a little more than seeding, but some of the seeders can do a lot of disturbance. So there's that part of it. And it can also, for any of these weeds that are herbicide resistant, using the inter-row cultivation is one, another management tool that we could use to start addressing some of these herbicide tolerant weeds. And another thing, so moving on to opportunities that I see, this here is an inter-row cover crop cedar that this is set up on 22 inches, and it's meant for corn. It was made by Gemstone up in around Gem, the Bassano area, Gemstone Cattle Company. And they so if you can see, it doesn't have a cultivator on it, but it just has little tines to kind of just gently work the surface, and some chains to kind of cover things over. And this is what they were able to do. This was a trial or a test last year. So the concept here is that you can relay crop your cover crop into it, or your next crop. So their idea is that they can actually graze this after they cut the corn for silage. With the snow in September, things didn't work out as well as expected, but it was still there. It was still growing. Now, where this could work, I know that a couple weeks ago they were talking about weeds and using cover crops to suppress some of the herbicide tolerant weeds. I think there's some advantages that we could see from this. And as way, peas, I'm not sure how well it would work, but there's issues with desiccation, there's issues with harvest. You wouldn't want something that's gets too big in there. But when we're looking at other crops, there's definitely options there. maybe even intercropping where there's very few weed control options, that we could say establish a pea crop early and then try to get a mustard or a canola put in between the peas just before, well, you know, kind of use a weed control, tillage weed control, and get some mustard or canola in there. So I think there's options. There's things that we can look at for that. So just gonna get the chat up here again, hopefully. Nope. Okay, yeah, I just saw the chat here. Yeah, with the residual herbicides, and that is one of the things that we could have did, but the way the farm is set up, they didn't have anybody that could spray at the time, so we just, and as I said, they're very much full tillage, so it was worked just prior to the seeding. So yeah, I mean, and some of the residual herbicides, that's something that can be looked into. We would have to look at the rotation, concerns on the residual herbicides, and I think maybe that's something that could be explored more. And I think other people have to look into it. So yeah. And let's see here. On the intercropping with Lana Shaw, there is the question about have I compared notes? Not specifically, but I've been following a lot of her work and a lot of the intercropping ideas and how to make it work. And I do think that this, like having these wide rows or a wider rows, and then trying to figure out ways that we can do it using tillage as more of the weed control, because the herbicide options, especially when you are looking at very different types of crops, there's very little that can work in it. So okay, are there any other questions? Okay, so that is what I have for my presentation. If there's no other questions, then I think that will be it for now.
Well, I want to say thanks, Scott. That's pretty cool. I know it's a little bit nerve-wracking because we're just at the preliminary stages of those studies as well, and that there's people that are willing to give it a try, and hopefully it works out in the end. You didn't really mention, did the quinoa work out, or are you guys thinking about trying any different crops?
Yeah, the quinoa has worked out. I mean, it got hurt by the wind in those over all the different storms. The wind did hurt it. I have thought that in the future, having a nurse crop for the quinoa would really help out too, because Centurion is something that can be sprayed in the quinoa. So we could have a nurse crop of some type of cereal and be able to spray it out later on. And I mean, the quinoa, it is the weed control is definitely an issue. If you don't start out with a very clean field, or if you don't start out, there is one grower that I know who did do the inter-row or the cultivation in crop, and I think that's doing a pretty good job. So there's you either need that a fairly weed-free field and a drill to just get a really quick stand, or you need a way to control those weeds, because Well, the precision, okay, so with precision planting, yes, it really did work well. We had a really, really nice stand. The depth, because quinoa is, again, like it's only a 1/4 inch deep. So getting a really quick stand really works well. Or the planter worked really nicely that way. But the problem with quinoa is it grows, it's extremely tiny at the beginning, and it grows only to a few inches tall, and then sits there for quite a long time before it does anything. So so that's what I'd say on it. So,
that definitely echoes our
just thought-
experience with quinoa.
okay. Yeah,
Seeding it later seems to be the better bet too, so that you can kind of get a lot of those early weeds germinated and then terminate them before you seed.
Yeah, and we thought we had it figured out perfectly because it was planted just before the long weekend, and then we ended up it was hot weather after, and then then the rain started showing up in the forecast, and then we got that cold big rain for the following next weeks, and then more, just as it was getting going, then another cold stretch. So in a year where a few years ago when we went from flooding to heat, then I think it would work really well. But it's been slow this year. So I just saw the question from Caitlin. It was a monosem, and it was on the 15-inch spacing. Oh, and the broadleaf, John had asked about the broadleaf or grass weeds. Maybe you can tell me, is it are you talking about the quinoa or the peas? And then with Jamie, with the cereal outcompeting the quinoa, I think if it's killed early enough, I don't think it'll be a problem, because the quinoa is very competitive once it gets going. And I mean, I saw where there was little bits of residue or little ridges of a hill or side of a just a little bit of protection for the quinoa. It's a difference of having a plant down to a growing point and trying to recover in a plant that's still okay. So I think since wind is always an issue here, I think it's definitely worth it. John, with the quinoa, with the competition, I'm not sure, because it's only the first year on it. I mean, the broadleaf chemicals, there's nothing out there. So spraying out the grasses is more of a because you have the option, so you do it. So with the broadleaves, from what I've been told, as long as they come up after the quinoa, then the quinoa will outcompete them. But I do wonder whether broadleaves, even if they're growing under the canopy, will still set seed and will cause you weed problems in the next year. But we'll find out. So.
Do you mind commenting how did the grower like the planter on the canola?
It worked really well. Yeah. Unfortunately, the winds took care of or blew out a lot of the canola, but well, not a lot, but there's big areas that got blown out. But actually, one of the really interesting things I saw is that in the past, I've seen when they've used the drill, if they don't get the water on right away, then you'll have that 2-stage emergence. Whereas this year, a lot of the canola got planted and it was dry, and there's a lot of tillage, so it was planted. It was consistently a 1/4 inch deep, and and there was no rain afterwards, and so there was nothing came up. Like it was all sitting in dry. So when the water came, when they were able to irrigate it, it just all came up at once. So the depth of seeding is really nice to see. So. Okay.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions, Scott. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us and share your experience with us. Definitely learned a few things. So,
yep.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time. And if anyone has any further questions, they can get in touch with Scott or us, and we can forward it along.
Okay. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.